should first bulletproof the idea in your head.
Correct.
Before you bulletproof it in the real world. If you have focus, determination, long-term marathon running kind of thing, then you can bring change. We had about 10,000 startups 10 years back. Today we have 150,000 startups. So I think it will go to 1 million by 2035. All the ingredients are in place because I think capital is there and more capital will come. Every time an internet company goes public, it creates 50 new entrepreneurs. So imagine that happening at a scale.
The Aadhaar project, how did the scale of that not daunt you?
So first of all, the scale was crazy. Giving 1.4 billion people an ID is a non-trivial problem. I publicly said in August of 2009 that we would issue 600 million IDs in 5 years, which nobody goes around in government saying, I'll do something. So I said, I'll put my stake in the ground. When we design digital public infrastructure, it's different from a market. See, in the private sector, you focus on a market segment. When you're designing public infrastructure, it's how do you get 1.4 billion people in the game? How do you level it out so that they're all leveled out and all have the same access? We had 1,200 people from 110 countries who want to implement digital public infrastructure. A lot of focus should be actually on applying AI to real world problems. And that's where India has an edge because we have solved a lot of population scale real world problems. So we do more of that with AI. Abundance thing going to happen. There'll be enough of everything. So you can't derive purpose from that. But you have to find something else which gives you purpose. So I think go for purpose.
Nandan, welcome and thank you for doing this.
Sure, Aditya.
Nandan, what I'll start off by saying is that, when as Ruchi and I talk about who deeply inspires us and who we would like to model, our long-term careers and lives after, like your name is often one that comes up. And it's because, you've retained that sense of curiosity, energy, enthusiasm up until your young old age, so it's remarkable. So I guess my opening question was going to be, what motivates you?
No, I think I'm extremely curious and I always want to learn new things, keep on top of things, be relevant, and leverage my, I have a network of people I know now, I have a network of information I have, and if I bring it all together, I can have great impact. So that's what keeps me going.
Amazing. So, I love that you start with curiosity, because one of the things we say at SPC is that when you're in that -1 phase, kind of, it's what do you tell someone? What is a common question you ask? It's so easy to ask, what's your startup idea? What are you working on? But we tend to reframe the questions internally as, in the -1 days, you should ask, what are you curious about? Like, what is a thread of curiosity that you're pulling on? So maybe to extend that, then how do you go from that curiosity? How do you actually pick things? Like, you've worked on so many things.
Yeah, so I operate in 4 quadrants.
Okay.
I operate as a doer in business and also think about business strategy and write about it. I'm also a doer in the public space and a thinker in the public space. So I operate in, that's why I'm able to, I have a sort of much wider view of many things. And so I look for things that have high impact.
Okay.
Potentially very high impact, which is playing the long game, in the sense the impact may not be felt immediately. It may not be obvious to other people that this is impactful, but I know that I have the conviction that I have a mental roadmap that says that if I persist in this for a few years, I know that there will be a good outcome. So that's, you have to believe in that. It's conviction from processing a lot of information and concluding that this is a desirable, plausible, and achievable goal. So once it meets all these tests, then I go all in.
Yeah, I think that the ability to kind of be on the island of your own self-conviction for a while is very important, right? And to think long term. But maybe to get a little bit deeper into it, what would you say? Are you a meticulous planner? Do you kind of go and think a lot, or are you more of, you can just do things and just start doing something?
No, I think I spend a lot of time thinking about the plausibility of doing something, in the sense, before I plunge into it, I want to have a clear thought process that I know there is a way to get to the end game. Once I have that map in my head, then I So I spend a lot of time before I plunge into it. I do that. I'll give an example. This when I did the Aadhaar project.
That was going to be my next
Yeah.
question.
So I'll give a practical example. So what happened was that I was actually asked whether I wanted to be the HRD Minister of India. So I said, why not? Let me go and fix education. So then they said, what else would you like to do? I said, okay, let me give. I knew that time they had this ID project which said give everyone an ID. But before I said yes to that, I had a bunch of friends, technology guys, everybody, and said, is this doable? Because before I go and commit to doing something, I want to make sure that there is a path to this. And we spent quite a few days and weekends just thinking through how will this work, what are the risks, what are the pitfalls, where what are the technology issues, political issues. And so when I actually went to say I'll do this project, I had a fairly good idea in my head that I know how I'd get there. So I think generally before I accept something or plunge into something, I do that check.
I swear I didn't set this up. It sounds like you had your own mini SPC coming up with that card, because a lot of what we say is that before you start building, just take some time, surround yourself with smart people, and just keep on poking at the idea.
Like even those initial conversations will, iron sharpens iron, right? So like if you, after 3 months of vetting something, you are still really into it, then it has to be a stronger idea.
Yeah. I think the idea, you should first bulletproof the idea in your head.
Correct.
Before you bulletproof it in the real world.
So maybe to go from that. So you have, you've kind of gone from, you've found an idea that you think kind of meets your criteria of being long-term impact, large-scale impact, perhaps something that is not obvious to everyone in the world today. You've come up after that, something has met that criteria, you've come up with a mental map, kind of like, okay, these are the chess pieces I need to play. What's the next step you often take after that? Is it finding a team?
Well, often these ideas are not necessarily started by me.
Okay.
Because somebody comes to me with a great idea and then he or she obviously wants to do it. And then I go through this mental process. And then when I'm convinced I think this guy is onto something big, then I will fully back that person. So these days I only do that. I don't do anything myself. I just figure out who the right guys to back, the right men and women to back who have big ideas.
Nowadays, I'm going to get you a cursor account. Everybody's writing code nowadays, Yeah. But one of the quotes that you had said in one of your previous interviews that really resonated with me was, you said that all you had was one page. You kind of started with one page.
Yeah, in the Aadhaar project.
In the Aadhaar project. And I would love to spend a little bit more time. Talk us through some of the early days.
Yeah, sure.
Because now it's such a huge success. It's being emulated by different countries. But how did the scale of that not daunt you? Like, it's kind of
yeah. So first of all, the scale was crazy, giving 1.4 billion people an ID is a non-trivial problem. But we had that, as I said, we did all this debating, confabulating, arguing, and we finally said, okay, there is a path to success. There's a road to success. So that's when I took it up. A few things. One, it had to be done at scale and speed, because I was clear that we should do this in a way that it reaches substantial size in one government term. So that's why I publicly said in August of 2009 that we would issue 600 million IDs in 5 years, which nobody goes around in government saying, I'll do something. So I said, I'll put my stake in the ground. Now, to give 600 million IDs in 5 years, I had to build a system which issued 1.5 million a day. And to do 1.5 million IDs a day, and assuming one enrollment station has 50 enrollments, that's 35,000 enrollment stations had to be live simultaneously across every nook and corner of India. So the scale was like daunting. But we thought through the whole thing. We built an architecture for the scale. We built a way to remotely understand what was happening. And this is long before you had connectivity and all that. So we had to build a offline method of ensuring that every data packet collected in every part of the country was of a certain minimum quality and all those things. So that was the front end part, which is how do you build a network of 35,000 enrollment stations. Everybody keys in the data in the same day. We had 100,000 operators we had trained. Everything was at that scale. So that was the front end part. The back end part was very different. Was how do we do biometric deduplication at scale? So how do you take somebody's biometric data and compare it with all the people you have to see whether it's a duplicate or not? Now, let's say we had 500 million people in our database and we did 1 million new enrollments. That's 500 trillion pattern matches we had to do every night. So the kind of computing infrastructure we had, thousands of servers, all, parallel, like doing parallel processing and all that. So the technology was extremely complex, and nobody had done this before. Nobody had solved a problem of unique deduplication of 1 billion people. So we were on completely uncharted territories. But whatever tests we did, we said, okay, this is probably doable. So we did that test also. So I think we had to build this whole infrastructure, but that was the technology part of it. So that took 14 months to build the version 1 of this infrastructure.
Still pretty quick.
Yeah. We had a team right here in Bangalore on Outer Ring Road, which was where I did one thing was I kept the political bureaucratic office in Delhi. I kept the technology office in Bangalore. I wanted these guys to do their work and not get bothered by stuff there. So while this was being built, I went and met everybody because anyway I had nothing much to do. So I went and met every state government, met the chief minister, met the bureaucrats, I met the politicians, I met the judges, I met lawyers, I met activists, I met journalists, I met the World Bank. I met anybody on the street I would catch and tell them about this Aadhaar stuff. So because of that 14 months of effort, I was able to create a climate of opinion across all these people. And I always went to everybody with what's in it for them, to support this. So I created good support across the country on this so that when we actually rolled it out, I didn't face that much opposition.
Yeah, I still think that the scale of it is actually just mind-boggling. Like even having worked at large, obviously, companies, whether it be Facebook or Dropbox and a bunch of our portfolio companies, the scale of the Aadhaar card still kind of is mind-boggling, right? I think it's kind of hard to think of a project that has had that level of distributed scale and that needs to work more or less correctly, because it's kind of hard to make mistakes in that system.
Every packet had to be absolutely solid, robust. It was encrypted,
right,
digitally signed, all kinds of things to ensure that nobody can tamper. It was tamper-proof.
Yeah,
it had to be transmitted from across the country to our data centers in Bangalore and Delhi. It was a very complex thing, but we also had a digital map of this thing, in the sense we could track every packet down to the last where it was, what it was doing. So the granularity and the telemetry was very high.
Why, it's one of the, why do you think Silicon Valley is so bad at, or perhaps even the American government, I'd say? Why have they really struggled to kind of build these kind of foundational layers that perhaps, let's call it digital public infrastructure, like the American government has remarkably little of that.
No, I don't agree with that completely, because what is the internet? Internet is digital public infrastructure. Internet was designed 40 years back. It was paid for by the US government. It was funded by DARPA and others. And basically, every piece of the internet, the original internet.
That's true.
And the protocols for the original internet, SMTP protocol, HTTP, HTML, all was public. So up till about 94, 95, the entire internet was public infrastructure. It's only after Mosaic was built and then Andreessen moved to the Valley and started Netscape with that guy.
Jim Clark,
that the private internet began. And then, of course, you had Google and Facebook. Yeah. So that private internet is only 30 years old. So it's before, there was another 10 years before that, the public internet. And all the early internet was all public. For example, the World Wide Web was designed at CERN in Switzerland. And the protocol was put by Tim Berners-Lee as a public protocol.
It's true.
That's one example of a DPI. And built entirely by US government.
That's true.
And the same thing is true of GPS. GPS was again paid by Department of Defense, and it was for missile triangulation and all that. But fundamentally, they developed the system to answer the question, where am I? Mm-hmm. And this was built in the Star Wars days, 80s and 90s. It was only put for commercial usage in 2000 by President Clinton, and then it became commercially available. And 6 years later, you had Google Maps, and 9 years later, you had Uber.
That's right.
So I think both GPS and internet are very good examples of digital public infrastructure built by state support, but which were opened up for private innovation. So we took the same idea forward. We said, that there are pieces of the infrastructure which have to be done at population scale, which if done, everybody can benefit and moves the needle on capability. So it's not an old idea. It's just an idea. We took it forward.
Maybe to move on to the next topic about AI and India. One of the trends definitely is that every country seems to want to have some kind of like sovereignty over AI capability. Now, whether that means it's their own kind of like, sovereignly trained model or certainly sovereignly trained infrastructure to deploy those models, there's some aspect of essentially what is my sovereign story here. So what do you think that should be for India? Like,
yeah, I think the question is, where does the sovereignty begin?
correct.
Right? If you are truly sovereign in your AI, then everything in the stack has to be yours. Otherwise, it's not sovereign. Okay, you may build your model.
Yeah.
You may train it on your own data. But if the underlying chip is somebody else's, then it's no longer sovereign. So I don't know what is sovereign here.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think of it, the truly sovereign stacks are just in China and America. That's it.
Do you think India should be doing more? Because you're right. Like, I mean, are you going to build GPUs also? Okay, that's hard.
So where do you stop? Then
Yeah.
where's the fab? You can go back and say, where's the fab?
yeah.
In fact, nobody has the fab. The fab is in Taiwan. So, so I think my own view is that at least for the time being, we should build models, and there are many people building models, Sarvam and all of them.
Yeah.
You have these Maya guys all building models. So I think that's great, and I think it should be done. But a lot of focus should be actually on applying AI to real world problems. And that's where India has an edge, because we have solved a lot of population scale real world problems. So we do more of that with AI. And my view is that over time, the lower levels of the stack will get commoditized.
I think we're already seeing.
If you look at some of the Chinese models, they're amazing. Every week there's a new one. There's DeepSeek and Kim or whatever it is. There's of course Quen. Minimax. I mean, and they are publishing everything. They're publishing the model. They publish the weights. They're publishing all the tricks of the trade. How they did, mixture of experts. So I think if this rate of knowledge permeates to the world, you'll commoditize the lower levels of the stack, which means that those who build the upper levels of the stack are going to benefit. So we should build those. I mean, that's my view. It's a personal view.
No, I agree with this. And I think that AI is a somewhat kind of, if you kind of look at generally how technologies kind of develop and who funds them and who gets first access to them, AI is somewhat unique in the history of technologies in that it's actually completely, it's generally available, democratized, and actually commoditized almost from like day one, right? Like it's not just that the military is getting to use it, or not only the kind of like the enterprises who can pay a lot of money. Like, everybody in India can actually have access to ChatGPT now if you have a smartphone. And it's also really interesting. I think one of the common critiques I hear sometimes in India is that we don't have access to GPUs, we don't have access to the capital resources. But I mean, a lot of these Chinese companies are training these models for like a lot cheaper. You don't need billions of dollars to kind of build like these foundation model pre-training runs. So I do think, we'll get to what you can build higher up in the stack in 1 second. But I think even in this realm of training models, I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think, and also what's happening is with this mixture of experts kind of thinking, you don't need to build one mega model, which is, zillion, trillion parameter kind of thing. You can build many small models that are very focused and then bring them all together and orchestrate them to do the thing you want.
Yeah. What would you mentioned about if AI is a democratizing and commoditized technology, then we can essentially build a lot of things for it up the stack. So and in particular, I think India has it's a very interesting confluence of obviously a lot of technical, essentially like talent, but then also a lot of high-end kind of white collar work that happens here. So what role do you think we can play, obviously, to bring AI into those? And I'm sure you see that at Infosys, but then what also do you think could we then bring back to the world using the unique capabilities and perhaps knowledge that we have?
No, I think certainly a lot of the enterprise AI stuff will happen here.
Yeah.
Because Indian companies are already familiar with the business needs of every major corporation in the world. and all of them are embarking on this journey of AI-led transformation. And it's not magic. You don't get up in the morning and some AI transformation happens. You have to do a lot of things, a lot of stuff on data, on responsible AI, on making sure that the quality of output is good, that there's no hallucinations. You need to create an architecture which allows you to use multiple models. There are lots of issues anyway. So I think all that will happen here. So I think we will learn how to apply AI at scale and speed to the world's challenges, and that will be a huge opportunity.
What do you think are the opportunities to, and you've obviously been involved with AI for Bharat and so on, but where do you think the opportunities are to provide AI as a public good in India?
Yeah, so I think that there are 3-4 dimensions to this. One is providing data for everyone to consume to improve the AI models. See, today the way it's working is everyone is doing the same thing. They're all probably using the same data source. They're all going to Reddit or something like that and building their models. So 5 guys are doing it. But there's a lot of data out there which is non-competitive. And that data, if it can be made available as a digital public good, then everybody can use those models. So that's what we do in AI for Bharat, which is we are creating the data for 22 Indian languages as a public good. So we have a whole infrastructure of collecting samples from across the country. We have collected thousands of hours of samples, and those samples are then put into a database, and that database is available to everyone to use. So anyone who wants to improve the quality of, say, Indian language capability can use that. The government has set up this thing called AI Kosh, which is a repository of open data. So it's in that location. So you can take that, and so if 5 startups are trying to build language AI, they can nuance it any way they want, but they can use this as a core data. So one way to think of public DPI in AI is to have digital public goods. Now this is not just this, it could be for weather or it could be whatever. As long as shareable data which everybody has equal access to. And then there is the thing of making it available as APIs. So you can create public APIs, AI APIs for doing different things, agriculture, education, and so on. So there are different ways to think about DPI approach. So that's AI and digital, using a public approach. And then in digital public infrastructure, you can use AI. So that's the other way around. So, for example, if you look at Aadhaar authentication, and Aadhaar does about 80 million auths a day. You can do a biometric auth, whatever. All the biometric auth does liveness detection using AI. So, for example, if somebody tries to use a gummy finger, it won't go through. Or if you try to use a photograph, so there's a liveness detection that there's actually a proof of personhood kind of thing. There's a person at the end of that. The entire stuff is AI based.
Yeah, I really would, obviously, as I've been here for the last week, AI is on everyone's mind. And this is kind of all people want to talk about. And I've been trying quite hard to change the narrative that it's not that India is behind. I actually think we are incredibly well positioned in terms of the AI is a uniquely democratizing technology, right? And I think that both the level of technology talent we have here and kind of the workflows that we have learned how to do over the last 20 years, I think it has some unique advantages. So I would really like to shift the narrative that we are behind in AI and actually to give people the confidence that we have a ton of advantages, right? We in fact should be thinking that we are much more well positioned. In some ways, yes, just to use China as a counter example. Yes, they're building a bunch of models, but a lot of what AI is going to be used for, if you look at, for instance, modern reinforcement learning, a lot of it is about workflows. What do people actually want to do? How do you create these smaller models, these more specialized models? And we're in a much better position to do all that.
Totally. I think the smaller end of the model spectrum will be done by everyone. Yeah. And then you'll figure out, you'll then create orchestration layer that takes some frontier models, some smaller models, some open source models. It's all about how you then start orchestrating these things.
Yeah. And, I think that the one area that, and, we were talking a little bit about this earlier, but I do think that the level of demand for compute related to AI is going to be very large. And I think if you're trying to do low latency stuff, I think we do need to figure out how to co-locate GPUs within the country. But I'm already seeing a ton more data centers kind of come up, and a lot of it is being nearshored in terms of GPU capacity.
No, I think that'll all happen.
Capitalism, it'll happen, yeah.
I think, markets will take care of that.
Right. Yeah. So maybe to now shift gears to just talk about the India startup ecosystem. One of the things that you had mentioned before that was actually, I think, really maps to how I think about the world is like, why can't India have 1 million startups?
We will have 1 million
Yeah.
by 2035.
Yeah. So, and I think that's hugely inspiring because, there's one strain of thought in Silicon Valley. I think there's, a bunch of smart people, I think, feel that the number of true entrepreneurs in the world is limited, right? And the goal of venture capital is to try to find 20 or 30, Elon Musks and kind of put all money into them. I tend to disagree with that. I think there's a lot more talent that can be unearthed and essentially nurtured to build startups. And so I think that there's a lot more, India should have, an order of magnitude more startups than they have today. And I hope South Park Commons can play a part in building that. And I don't think of it as a zero-sum game. I think more startups means there's more kind of areas to fund, more opportunities to tackle. So this is a long-winded way of saying, Nandan, which is, what do you think is the biggest factor holding us back in India right now?
Actually, I think I'm fairly confident that, we had about 10,000 startups 10 years back. Today we have 150,000 startups. So I think it will go to 1 million by 2035. I think all the ingredients are in place because I think capital is there and more capital will come. I think capital will come by itself. I think the virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship is happening because every time an internet company goes public, it creates 50 new entrepreneurs. All those guys who made money there then leave and start their own company. So imagine that happening at a scale. And I've studied the data on number of entrepreneurs that came out of some of the early companies like Flipkart and all. It's large.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. So that's a virtuous cycle. Then many of the early entrepreneurs who made money are now becoming seed and angel investors. So there's a virtuous cycle of capital, there's a virtuous cycle of entrepreneurship. And I think there are enough things to be solved. So I think that will take care of itself. I think the place where we need to focus on, which is really more of a government thing, is improving ease of business. How do we reduce friction to business in India? Because that has a huge multiplier effect. Imagine if there's millions startups, all of them have less friction to business. Then dramatic thing, right? So that's a high leverage activity.
Yeah. And it's interesting. When I talk to entrepreneurs here, all of them point out there's been a lot of progress in terms of ease of starting a business, but there is a huge gap. I tell people in America, if I wanted to start a company, I can have that idea by 1 p.m. By 3 p.m., I will be incorporated, have a bank account, and I can take money from a VC and spend my first AWS bill. That still takes a while in India.
Some of these things are better. It's more the day-to-day stuff of running a business where you're dealing with tax authorities, you're dealing with all kinds of government departments. That's where the rubber hits the road.
I mean, I had to sign 70 pages of documents today just for, some opening an account here. Let me push on that for a second. So there's obviously the government. We are seeing a lot of kind of positive inputs into the system. Virtuous cycle of capital, virtuous cycle of essentially people who know what good looks like in terms of companies. This is fantastic. This is what Silicon Valley runs on, But do you think, and then you also the government is making a concerted effort, fantastic. Are there cultural elements that you think we need to change here?
No, I don't think so. I think the entrepreneur has come front and center in society, which is a big deal.
Yeah,
because when we started, everybody said, "Are you crazy? Go and take a job somewhere." What are you trying? So I think from those days, and I was just looking at the data, the topper at IIT 10 years back said, "I want to be a scientist." Today's topper says, "I want to be Elon Musk." So clearly, there's a sea change in mindsets. So I think culturally, I don't see an issue at all. I think entrepreneurs are now celebrated; they're front and center, and also very importantly, I think it's okay to fail. Now, in many cultures, if you fail, you're it's a problem. So then you don't become an entrepreneur, you're worried of failing. I see so many guys whose companies have not gone through, but they come back in a new avatar very quickly. So that's also a sign that failure is accepted, which I think is a huge part of it.
Yeah, the most positive thing that we have seen at SPC, which was that, and this was a kind of a hypothesis on our part when we started a year ago, was that, to join SPC, you kind of have to, in some ways, admit that you don't know what you want to work on, or you are thinking about it. And you have to almost drop the facade of knowing everything, right? So that was one of my open questions. Will that model kind of like come to SPC and for 6 months kind of wander a little bit, try to come up with like ideas, stress test them, and you might have to, in some ways you're implicitly saying I don't know all the answers, right? But that requires a certain degree of courage and I would say self-confidence. And I was curious about whether it would work in Bangalore, and it's been amazing. People are willing. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah. No, every day I meet just for curiosity again, what's going on, right? So I meet entrepreneurs every day, and it's extraordinary. The scale of the ambition, it's quite remarkable. I mean, and these are some guys just out of not even in college, that kind of thing. So I think it's a golden era for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I mean, we just met Shri, 23 years old and building airplanes. It's pretty incredible.
Totally.
Yeah. Do you think that, what are there traits of entrepreneurship that you think are uniquely required to succeed in India? I'll give you an example. I think anywhere an entrepreneur needs to be resilient. They need to be able to roll with the punches. They need to be very ambitious. They need to be internally self-convicted. They need to have a long-term view. Do you think some of these traits are more like required in our ecosystem here?
No, yeah, these are generic traits, but also I think why Indian entrepreneurs are successful is because they can deal with chaos.
That's true.
It's just getting to office is chaos. So, so when you can deal with chaos, that actually makes you even more stronger.
100%.
And I think the same reason why Indians are successful as CEOs in America, because they can deal with the chaos of today's world, right?
This is very true. Are there particular areas or verticals within the Indian ecosystem that you think represent perhaps bigger areas of opportunity that not enough people are tackling right now?
Well, I mean, I can tell you where I'm working. So that means I've therefore come to the conclusion that these are areas that are worth working on, right? So obviously, in AI, the work is on how to use AI at country scale to really change people's lives. So we are working on language to make sure that, if every Indian can access a service in his own language, like your Maya guys are talking about, then suddenly you've expanded dramatically inclusion, right? Everybody can participate, talk in Tamil, Hindi, or Maithili, whatever. And then that just changes the whole equation of, just like touch phones change because people could, put on YouTube videos without knowing how to use a keyboard. So the same thing is happening with voice now. So I think language. Second is education. And some of the work we're doing is how do we improve basic literacy and numeracy with AI tools? Because if more kids can read, write, do arithmetic, then big benefit. And the third is agriculture, because India is such a large farmer base. So this is what I'll call as my applying AI for social impact. So that's one bucket where I operate. The second is I'm involved with designing something called the Finternet.
Yeah.
Which is the financial internet. The idea being that we have seen the power of tokenization, and the public blockchains have shown us that you can tokenize, you can create a verifiable asset, it's immutable, you can sell it. It really, removes the friction of trading an asset. But this is all being done in the crypto kind of world, which is outside the mainstream world. And now, of course, some of it is seeping in, but in a way that people are saying, I'll buy crypto as an asset class and all. But if you really want to change the system where every type of asset, whether it's gold, real estate, art, 100%. Deposits, bonds, everything can be tokenized. Is there a way to think of an architecture for doing this that is agnostic to the asset? So any asset can fit into this, and that any asset can trade and trade at very high volume. Because in the real world, we need high volumes. So the Finternet architecture provides for that. And that we have set up a global institution called Networks for Humanity with the Finternet in that, which is to create this, and there's tremendous global. In fact, I'm going to Singapore day after to speak at the Singapore FinTech Festival on the Finternet. So I think that is going to have a big impact on financial things. And that's leveraging blockchain, but in a regulated world. So it's not creating a parallel world of cryptocurrency. It's regulated that's one. The second one. The third thing is we're doing a lot of work on open networks. How do you create more inclusive solutions which allow people to participate without an aggregator sitting in between? So ONDC, which is our open network for digital commerce, does about 15 million transactions. So you can buy and sell directly between consumer and seller. So, example, Namayatri, which allows you to book an auto without paying 30% to some guy in the middle. So those are all things different. But in that, one of the biggest opportunities is what we call as the digital energy grid.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So I would say, if I look at what I'm working on, it's Finternet, open networks, including digital energy, AI for public good, and then taking DPI global.
Okay, yeah.
Because we all learned a lot of lessons in DPI. So we're saying, how do we take it to other countries? I'm just back from Cape Town, where we had a global DPI summit. I came back on Friday, and we had 1,200 people from 110 countries who want to implement digital public infrastructure. So that's one. So these are 3-4 areas where I do some stuff.
So some follow-up questions on that. So on the agriculture part in particular, you're right. Like India, obviously huge. It's a huge segment of our kind of like our labor force. But is there a way to, like, how can we help entrepreneurs also on the more capital side, like capitalism side of that?
Yeah. No. See, I think, what do farmers need? Right? They need access to information.
Yeah.
They need to know markets, prices, weather, soil conditions. They need access to inputs, better seeds, better fertilizer, and so on. They need access to capital, be able to borrow money to invest, and they need access to markets. Whatever the thing is, how do we make these accesses easier? So through ONDC, I should be able to access the market.
Mm-hmm.
Through the account aggregator system, I get access to credit. Through this thing called Vista, which, by the way, is a government project, you get access to information. So if you can, at scale, reduce friction to information, market access, capital access, and so on, then something will happen. Markets will also play a role. I mean, remember, everything that we do in digital public infrastructure is enabling market innovation. Today, the market value of companies built on top of India's DPI is $150 billion. It's not small. I mean, you saw people like Pine Labs going public. You saw Grow going public. They all use PhonePe is going public shortly. They all use the underlying eKYC or this and that we built.
Yeah, it's interesting because I often feel as though that, at least in some of the categorization of India 1, India 2, India 3, the question is like in that India 3 bucket, like, it's, I feel as though entrepreneurs just focus on the first two. And in the India 3 is kind of like, listen, the propensity to pay, kind of like the disposable income, all of that is too low. Then the question is, well, is there a way to, in some ways, bootstrap the market mechanism there by using the government either for aggregate demand or something like that? But maybe that's something that can happen in the future. Yeah.
But also, when we design digital public infrastructure, it's different from a market. See, in the private sector, you focus on a market segment.
Yep.
And then you try to get product market fit for that market segment. And you obviously want a paying market segment will buy your stuff. When you're designing public infrastructure, it's how do you get everybody in the game? How do you get 1.4 billion people in the game? How do you level it out so that they're all leveled out and all have the same access? And how do you then create an institutional method for them to improve their lives? That's a different model of thinking then.
It is.
Yeah. So when we think about it, there's a lady in a village, she doesn't have ID, she gets an ID. With the ID, she gets a bank account. With the ID, she gets a mobile connection. Then she starts a small operation using borrowed money. She starts selling stuff. When she sells stuff, she gets it as digital payments using UPIs. That gives a digital trail of her payments, which she then can monetize and get a loan. So, we created a ramp for 1 billion people to improve their lives. So when you think DPI, you think about how do you create these kind of things. Then on top of that, markets will operate. So different guys will come in and build applications, use cases for their segments.
Yeah. On the Finternet side, Nandan, do you think that, and because you're right, like, kind of crypto in some ways poisoned the well, where like essentially all the rampant speculation, DeFi, this and that kind of, in some ways, obfuscated the fact that this is actually just financial infrastructure. This is global, decentralized, permissionless, essentially like scaled out infrastructure. And that's fantastic because we haven't seen innovation in that part of the stack for a long time. But I know that India hasn't had a ton of innovation in that particular kind of like, even the stable coins or kind of the emerging parts of, like, I would say, crypto rails that are happening in America. So do you think that there is appetite for regulatory change there?
Well, I think there is some, because it'll also be forced, because if you look at what's happening in the US, there's a huge adoption of these kind of things.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Genius Act, which has essentially regularized stable coins.
Correct.
So if a dollarized stable coin is around and creating a fast payment rail, then countries have to respond.
They need to have their own version of that.
So even if you don't like it, you may be forced into it. But in any case, when we think about internet, we're solving it globally. We have labs around the world. We have people doing early projects in Singapore, US, Europe. So it's a global thing.
Okay. And maybe the last follow-up question on your 3 areas. Can you tell us a little bit about the digital energy grid?
Yeah. So I think the digital energy grid came from the realization that the nature, and this is really about electric energy. Now, electric energy is the fastest growing part of the energy ecosystem because of AI, data centers, EVs, heat pumps, everything needs electricity. So electricity is a growth industry. Now, electricity has not actually gone through any big change for 100 years. Last time electricity had issues of technology was 100 years back when Edison and Tesla fought with each other.
AC/DC, yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so that's about 120 years back. So, but now there's a dramatic change happening because of the nature. One is, of course, renewables coming, but more importantly, distributed energy. So every home will have a battery. Every home will have a battery in an EV car. Every home will have a rooftop solar. Every home will have a smart meter. So every home now is actually a producer, consumer, buyer, and seller of energy. And price of energy in the old days was one bill at some rate. Tomorrow energy price will change every millisecond, because when the sun is beating down, power will be available cheap. When there's shortage, it'll go up. So dynamic pricing will happen every day, and everybody is a buyer and seller. So it's going to become a very different world of fast fluctuating transactions, and we don't have the digital infrastructure for that. So digitally designs a world where everybody produces, buys, sells, all in real time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the combination of an order of magnitude ubiquitous on-demand electricity coupled with modern kind of like actuators like motors coupled with modern power electronics will actually make a lot more devices in homes, whether that be humanoid robots, quadruped robots. Like, I think that the possibilities are really endless.
Yeah, and we're seeing, we have a network of startups.
Yeah.
We have this thing called the Unified Energy Alliance. So there are many people working in this space, many startups working in this space. So they all come together. And already there's lots of transactions happening all on this infrastructure. And now India is coming out with something called the India Energy Stack.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm an advisor on that, on how do we create across the country this modern infrastructure. And of course, there's also global conversations.
Yeah, because a lot of these standards and interfaces and protocols for connecting the grid are just very haphazard right now. Okay, amazing. Okay, so we have about 10 minutes left. I'm going to open it up to 2 questions from the audience, maybe 3. Okay. I saw you raise your hand first.
I'm 23. I'm massively inspired by your work. My question to you was, a lot of startup is about cutting down a lot of signals and focusing on a niche. So what ideas have you previously rejected working on, and why? And like, how do you reject ideas?
Oh, you mean as an investor or as...
No, as something you would focus to work on.
Oh, okay. Okay, so I'm slightly different because I'm more doing this public stuff, right? I have a grid, 2x2 matrix, like consulting guys. Low impact, high impact, low friction, high friction. So I work in that quadrant, which is high impact, low friction. You get me? High impact, but there are many things that are high impact with high friction. What happens when you have high impact, high friction is 80% of your time goes with fighting with somebody who doesn't want it to happen. So I don't want to waste my time on that. So I will focus on high impact, low friction. And by definition, this quadrant is something that most people can't see. Because if people can see them, they'll say, oh, this is going to affect me, so I'm going to stop this thing. So you have to be outside that realm only. So that's what I do. So I select for ideas in that quadrant. And then I look for opportunities where if you build some basic public rails, market innovation can flourish. And then I work with the best people who want to work on these problems.
Thank you for the insights, Nandana dear. My name is Manu Menon, and I'm building an AI product for leadership development. Here's my question to you. The world of work is getting fully upended because of AI. Being AI aware is almost becoming as important as being digitally aware. So, for a highly motivated professional today, what does it mean to differentiate in this era?
Well, I think my feeling is, again, this is again my view, it's not, is that the middle ground is where you're vulnerable. So on one end, you must have the mental models to think from first principles. Because first principle thinking is becoming more and more important, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're working. And that AI is not going to do that because it requires first principle creative thinking. That's one part. And on the other end, human skills, leadership, empathy, collaboration, motivation, getting a bunch of diverse people to work on the same goal. So you have to, if you develop those skills, so if you're able to deal with first principles on one side and able to deal with this human skills on the other side, you're safe.
I'll add one thing to this, which I mean, completely agreed with Nandan. One of the cool things about AI is that no matter who you are in the world, it's only been around for 3 years. Like nobody has that much of a head start. So I often think that like if you really want to be AI native, I mean, I honestly feel it's like spend 2 hours a day just learning how this thing works. Like actually go and, like some of the people who in some ways understand the most, they have spent, tens, hundreds of hours like poking around with the chatbot. And it's also kind of unique. You don't need to be a programmer to kind of understand how it works. You can literally sit there, prompt it, play with it. So I think a lot of it is actually coming back to having a beginner's mindset and to think about this AI not as something that is that much more powerful, but it is a tool with the world's most natural interface to kind of learn about how to do things, right? Like figure out like when does it make sense to use it in reasoning mode? Like figure out like when does ChatGPT, should it go think for you for 40 minutes versus like, think for you for like 30 seconds. Figure out which areas it actually does well in, which areas it needs your supervision. And I think that it really is a greenfield right now. Nobody knows that much about it, in my opinion. So I think it's just a beautiful time to have a beginner's mindset. I spend a lot of time just like playing around with these models, trying to learn about them. And I think it's actually really like fun because it's a unique moment in time. We have one more question for you.
So you talked about AI for public good in different sectors. I worked in this area of building better technology for people with disabilities. And if you see in a lot of developed countries like US, UK, it's very well developed, like the infrastructure, the environment for them, not to a large scale, but to some extent. In India, we don't even have those basics for a lot of people with disability. So what is your opinion on how AI can help a lot of people with disabilities to better, interact in different environments?
Well, I think it depends also on what it is, right? I mean, because there can be different kinds of disability and the response to different, they be different. I mean, if, providing wheelchair access may not be able to solve with AI. You have to provide wheelchair access in your office or whatever. But I think, for example, I know many people are working on visually challenged disability, and they're using AI to improve the ability of the visually challenged person to be able to read stuff and all. So I think there's no one answer to this, but I think we'll have to look at the whole matrix of disabilities and figure out which of them AI can play a role.
I have another question. Why do you think there are less women entrepreneurs in India and also in the world? Like, what are the gaps there, and how can we solve it?
I think men bullshit better.
Okay, well said. Okay. And then two questions to finish up here. You strike me as the person who is so focused on kind of curiosity and continuing to build that you very much look towards the future, right? But if you had to kind of like think about what would you, what do you hope from your work? What are the ways that, what would you hope like people are inspired by?
The fact that, you can bring change.
Yeah.
And that, it's not, you don't have to get up and say nothing is possible. if you have it, if you have focus, determination, long term, marathon running kind of thing, then you can bring change. So I think that should be the lesson for everyone.
You can just do things.
Yeah.
If you think, yeah, I deeply respect that. And last question I often ask people is, I have 3 young children, and it's quite hard to extrapolate. I mean, you asked a good question. Some things will remain fundamentally human in terms of how we work with people, in terms of what does leadership look like. But it's in some ways, it's also quite hard to know like what the world will look like 15 years from now, as kind of this new, very powerful technology radically changes the landscape. I'm not saying work will go away, but will look very, very different, I think. So what advice would you have for me as a parent, and perhaps a bunch of other parents in the room, about what should we equip our children with in terms of maybe skills, maybe knowledge, maybe empathy? I'm curious.
I think, I also don't know the answer, but I think having a sense of purpose, because purpose will trump everything else. And the purpose need not be, some dramatic purpose, change the world. It could be a simple purpose, and there's enough evidence showing that purpose leads to better health, longevity, and better mental health. So I think because many people will no longer, because the abundance thing going to happen, there'll be enough of everything. So you can't derive purpose from that, but you have to find something else which gives you purpose. So I think go for purpose.
I love that. Thank you, Nandan. It's
Thank you very much.
Honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much.